որում ամեն ինչ նենց է գլխի վայր շուռ գալիս, չես էլ հասցնում հասկանաս ոնց։
Քեզ առաջինն են իրենց տանտանիքից ներքև նետելու։ Եթե դու եղբորդ սպանության մեջ ձեռքեր
Ինչ գործ ունես, ինչ ես կպել այդ կնոջը, հա?
Դուք ընտանիքով իմ գլխին ինչ ասես անում եք, դնում եք, վերջում ինձ եք
Ասում եմ առանց վախենալու առաջ ես գնում։ Ես կողք դեմ իմացի։
Ես մանանին բացարձակ չեմ մեղադրում։ Հետո էլ Գրիշը այնքան ստիպեց, որ ասի ինչ է։
Ինչ ասեմ, խանութի բացումը արեցինք։
Լեոյի հետ է լինելու։
Համաձայնել ես։
Դեռ ոչ մի բան չեմ ասել։
Այնքան հաճախորդ ենք ունեցել, որ էլ ասելու չի։
Avo secretly paid off David's loan without telling anyone, and that single quiet act of generosity is about to explode into the ugliest confrontation this family has had in weeks, because David didn't take it as love, he took it as humiliation. Before we go further, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one myself, and I genuinely love seeing how far this story reaches. So let's see it tonight. Let's rebuild exactly where this family stands right now, because this last episode was one of the most emotionally loaded we've had in a long time. Avo, still reeling from getting caught with Olga, still humiliated in front of the entire family, quietly went behind David's back and paid off his loan using Nari's account details, framing it as a secret kindness he never wanted acknowledged. But David didn't experience it as kindness. He experienced it as another example of a man who cannot simply love his family without also trying to control the narrative around his own redemption. And that confrontation between them, raw, furious, years of resentment finally boiling over, is not going to stay contained to one conversation. In the coming episode, expect this rift between Avo and David to deepen rather than heal, because David said something in that argument that cannot be unsaid. That he has spent his entire life being hit and told it was for his own good. And Avo's inability to simply apologize without justifying himself is going to keep tearing at that wound. Now here's where things get genuinely dangerous, because Vova's physical altercation with Avo in this last episode was not simple family drama. It was a warning shot. Watch that relationship in the coming episode, because a young man who already caught his uncle sneaking around his own mother, who already dragged him out of a hospital room once, is not going to let this go quietly after being physically restrained by his own father in front of the whole family. Expect Vova's anger to curdle into something colder, more calculated, especially once he starts connecting Avo's erratic, guilt-ridden behavior to everything else swirling around this family right now. The assassination attempt on Hunan, the mystery of who's really funding Avo's sudden generosity, and Hunan's own suspicion that Artyom is standing behind everything. Speaking of Hunan, his conversation with Ina in this last episode revealed something we haven't seen from him before: genuine self-awareness about his own recklessness. When he admitted that his obsession with revenge, threatening Aram at knife point, storming into confrontations without thinking, has come at the cost of actually being present for Grisho, that admission matters. In the coming episode, expect Hunan to try, however clumsily, to redirect his focus toward his son. But watch how quickly that resolve gets tested, because Hunan already said out loud that he believes Artyom is behind everything, and a man like Hunan does not simply let a suspicion like that sit quietly while he focuses on being a better father. Now let's talk about the phone call Hunan made to Grisho, wanting to share the news about the baby to lift his spirits, only to be firmly told no by Ina, who insisted Grisho needs rest, not more emotional weight. Watch this dynamic in the coming episode, because Ina's protectiveness over Grisho is becoming its own quiet source of tension, and Hunan's comment that despite everything happening around them, this unborn child is the one point of light in all this darkness, followed immediately by his cold observation about the mother's identity, tells you exactly where this family's priorities are headed. Expect Hunan to start maneuvering, quietly, deliberately, to ensure that Masha does not get the influence over his grandson that she's clearly angling for, and expect that maneuvering to put him on a collision course with a woman who has already proven she does not back down from confrontation. Arno's exchange with Manon and Leo in this last episode deserves close attention too, because his desperate insistence that they swear off all contact with Masha and Ksyusha, his willingness to beg, to guilt trip, to threaten, reveals a man far more emotionally unstable than this family has given him credit for. In the coming episode, expect that instability to become a genuine liability, especially once Hunan starts circling closer to Artyom, because a man that fragile, that easily provoked, is exactly the kind of person capable of making a desperate mistake that exposes far more than he intends to. And now here's where the story turns towards something genuinely unsettling. Watch Avo's line in this last episode extremely closely, the one where he insists he has always known how to quietly do good deeds without anyone finding out, framing his secret payment to David's loan as proof of his generous nature. That phrase should not sit comfortably with you, because a man this practiced at hiding acts, this fluent in operating in the shadows while maintaining a public face of harmlessness, is exactly the profile Hunan has been hunting for since he woke up from that coma. In the coming episode, expect Hunan's suspicion to widen beyond Artyom alone, and expect Avo's sudden, unexplained access to enough money to pay off a loan he claims came from nowhere specific to become the detail that finally makes someone in this family stop and ask the question nobody has wanted to ask out loud. Where exactly did that money come from? And why has Avo spent this entire season inserting himself so deeply into every crisis this family has faced? David's line to Avo, telling him he's grateful he protected him, but that he still needs to think carefully about everything he's done, was not forgiveness. It was a warning wrapped in gratitude. Watch this dynamic evolve in the coming episode, because David is clearly the character in this family most capable of seeing through performance. And if Avo's generosity toward David was never purely about love, if it was calculated to buy loyalty and silence at a moment when Avo desperately needs an ally inside this family, David is going to be the one who eventually sees it for exactly what it is. Here's where everything starts to converge. Hunan's suspicion of Artyom is going to intensify, especially once he starts asking harder questions about who exactly benefits from keeping this family destabilized. Avo's mysterious source of money is going to become impossible to ignore, especially with Vova's anger toward him escalating past the point of simple embarrassment. And Masha's ambitions regarding the baby are going to collide directly with Hunan's quiet determination to keep her influence contained, setting up a confrontation between two people who are both used to getting exactly what they want. But here is the twist worth sitting with as we head into the coming episode. What if Avo's money did not come from savings at all? What if it came from the same source funding whatever Artyom has been orchestrating this entire time? And what if Avo's obsessive, humiliating pursuit of Olga has functioned this whole season as the perfect distraction? Loud enough, scandalous enough to keep this family's eyes locked on his romantic foolishness, while he quietly moves money and information for someone far more dangerous than a lovesick old man chasing his nephew's mother. And just as David starts to soften toward Avo, just as Vova's fury begins to cool into something more watchful than violent, Leo receives a phone call from an unknown number, a voice he doesn't recognize, warning him that if this family keeps digging into where Avo's money actually came from, they are going to uncover something that connects directly back to the night Hunan's car exploded outside that hospital. Avo just secretly paid off David's loan without telling anyone, and instead of gratitude, that single act tore open a wound between father and son that has been building for years. Because David didn't experience it as love. He experienced it as another example of a man who cannot give anything without also controlling how it's remembered. Before we go further, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one myself, and I genuinely love seeing how far this story reaches, so let's see it tonight. Let's rebuild exactly where this family stands right now, because this last episode carried more emotional weight than almost any other stretch of this story so far. Avo, still reeling from being caught with Olga, still humiliated in front of the entire family after that confrontation, quietly used Nere's account details to pay off David's loan behind everyone's back, framing it as the kind of quiet generosity he claims to have practiced his whole life. But David didn't take it that way at all. What came out of him in that argument wasn't gratitude, it was years of buried resentment, the accusation that he spent his whole childhood being hit and told it was for his own good, that Avo cannot simply do something kind without needing everyone to eventually acknowledge how good he actually is underneath the anger. In the coming episode, expect that wound to stay open rather than heal, because Avo's instinct in every single confrontation this season has been to justify himself instead of simply apologizing, and that pattern is not going to change just because he wrote a check. Now here's where things get genuinely dangerous, because Vova's physical confrontation with Avo in this last episode was not simple family drama. It was a warning shot neither of them is going to forget. Watch this relationship closely in the coming episode, because a young man who already caught his own uncle sneaking around his mother in the middle of the night, who already dragged him bodily out of a hospital room once, is not going to quietly let this go after being physically restrained by his own father in front of the entire family. Expect Vova's anger to stop being reactive and start becoming calculated, especially once he starts connecting Avo's erratic, guilt-heavy behavior to everything else swirling around this family right now. Hunan's suspicion about who orchestrated the attack on his life, and the uncomfortable question of exactly where Avo suddenly fronted enough money to pay off someone else's loan when he spent this entire season being treated as the family's embarrassment rather than its benefactor. Speaking of Hunan, his conversation with Ina in this last episode revealed something we genuinely have not seen from him before: real self-awareness about the cost of his own recklessness. When he admitted, almost quietly for a man like him, that chasing revenge, holding a knife to arm's throat, storming into every confrontation without thinking through the consequences, has come at the expense of actually being present for his own son, that admission mattered. It cracked something open in a character who has spent this entire story defined by control and dominance. In the coming episode, expect Hunan to make a genuine attempt to redirect his focus toward Grisho. Softer phone calls, more patience, less rage. But watch how quickly that resolve gets tested. Because in that same conversation, he told Ina directly that he believes Artyom is standing behind everything that's happened to this family. And a man built the way Hunan is built does not simply let a suspicion like that sit quietly while he tries to be a better father. Expect that tension, the pull between healing and hunting, to define his entire arc in the coming episode. Now let's talk about the moment Hunan wanted to call Grisha with the news about the baby, hoping it would lift his spirits, only to be firmly stopped by Ina, who insisted her son needs rest right now, not more emotional weight to carry from a hospital bed in another country. Watch this dynamic evolve in the coming episode, because Ina's protectiveness over Grisho is quietly becoming its own source of friction inside this marriage. A subtle disagreement about how much truth, how much involvement, a broken man recovering from paralysis can actually handle. And pay close attention to Hunan's remark right after, that despite everything collapsing around this family, this unborn child is the one point of light in all the darkness, followed almost immediately by his cold, calculating comment about the identity of the mother. That single shift in tone tells you everything about where his priorities are actually headed. In the coming episode, expect Hunan to start maneuvering quietly, deliberately, to make sure Masha never gets the kind of influence over his grandson that she has clearly been angling for since the moment she announced her own pregnancy like a business transaction. And expect that maneuvering to put him on a direct collision course with a woman who has proven over and over that she does not back down from confrontation, no matter who she's facing. Arno's phone call with Manon and Leo in this last episode deserves close attention too, because his desperate insistence that they both swear off all contact with Masha and Ksusha, his willingness to beg, to guilt trip, to swing between affection and threat within the same conversation, reveals a man who is far more emotionally unstable than this family has given him credit for up to this point. In the coming episode, expect that instability to become a genuine liability rather than simply an annoyance, especially as Hunan's investigation into who orchestrated the attempt on his life continues closing in around people connected to Arno's circle. A man that fragile, that easily provoked, that quick to threaten and then immediately soften, is exactly the kind of person capable of making one desperate, careless mistake that exposes far more than he ever intended to reveal. And now here's where the story turns towards something genuinely unsettling if you look closely enough. Watch Avo's own words in this last episode, the line where he insists he has always known how to quietly do good deeds without anyone ever finding out about them, framing his secret payment of David's loan as proof of a generous nature nobody in this family gives him credit for. That phrase should not sit comfortably with you. A man this practiced at operating in secret, this fluent in maintaining a harmless, foolish public face, while quietly moving significant amounts of money behind the scenes, fits a profile far more dangerous than the lovesick old fool this family keeps dismissing him as. In the coming episode, expect someone, likely David, given how sharply he's already started seeing through his father's performances, to start asking the question nobody in this family has wanted to ask out loud yet. Where exactly did that money actually come from? And why has Avo spent this entire season inserting himself so persistently into every single crisis this family has faced, from Olga to Hunan's hospital room to David's finances? David's parting words to Avo in that kitchen, telling him he's grateful his father protected him, but that he still needs time to really think through everything that's happened between them, were not forgiveness. They were a warning wrapped carefully inside gratitude, the kind of line a person says when they're not ready to fully trust someone, but aren't ready to cut them off completely either. Watch this dynamic evolve in the coming episode, because David has consistently been the character in this family most capable of seeing past performance to the motive underneath it. And if Avo's sudden generosity was never purely about love, if it was calculated to buy loyalty and silence at the exact moment Avo desperately needs at least one ally left inside this family, David is going to be the one who eventually sees it for exactly what it is. Here's where all of these threads start to converge into something bigger than any single storyline on its own. Hunan's suspicion of Artyom is going to sharpen in the coming episode, especially once he starts asking harder, more specific questions about who actually benefits from keeping this family destabilized, distracted, and fighting each other, instead of looking outward at the real threat. Avo's mysterious access to money is going to become impossible to quietly ignore, especially with Vovo's anger toward him curdling from embarrassment into something colder and more watchful. And Masha's ambitions surrounding the baby are going to collide directly with Hunan's quiet determination to keep her influence contained, setting up a confrontation between two people who have both proven repeatedly that they do not know how to lose gracefully. Now, here's a theory worth considering as we head into what's coming, and I want to be clear this is speculation built from the patterns this story keeps repeating, rather than anything confirmed. Given how deliberately this show has shown us that Avo operates in secrecy, that he's inserted himself into nearly every major crisis this family has faced this season, and that his sudden financial generosity arrived with zero explanation of its source, it would not be surprising if the coming episodes start drawing a much clearer line between Avo's erratic behavior and the larger question Hunan keeps circling back to. Who exactly is benefiting from this family staying broken? Whether that line leads directly to Artyom or somewhere else entirely, expect the writers to keep building toward the moment this family finally has to stop fighting each other long enough to ask who's actually been pulling strings the whole time. And just as David starts to soften slightly toward his father, just as Vova's fury begins cooling into something more watchful and less explosive, expect the coming episode to end on a note that reopens every single one of these wounds at once, likely through Hunan discovering something concrete enough to finally move past suspicion into action, something that forces this entire family to choose a side before they've even finished processing everything that just happened between them.